I had never put sails up on the boat before. She had never been on a sailboat before. And we took off and we made it work.
Welcome back to On the Wind. I'm your host, Emma Garshagen. And right now, our boat Falcon, our FAR 65, is probably somewhere between Antigua and Bermuda, if not already in Bermuda, with the skipper Chris and our first mate Mia. You can follow along with that passage and all of our other ones with our blogs on the Quarterdeck, which is our platform for deep dives on the art of seamanship. You can go to quarterdeck.59-north.com to see more of that. Also, on June 13th, you can join us in Annapolis for an open boat on Falcon. You have to RSVP, please, by going to 59-north.com/events. We hope to see you there. This season of On the Wind is presented in part by Dive Blue. Dive Blue makes portable, tankless scuba dive systems, so you can enjoy diving on your own terms. Dive Blue has created two unique systems, Nemo for diving up to 10 feet, and Nomad for diving up to 30 feet, so you can explore under the sea more simply. Nomad is what we have on both Falcon and Eastbjorn, and I'm super excited to try it out when I'm on the boat later in the summer in Iceland. Brr. As a mate on Falcon and a boat owner myself, Dive Blue enables easy inspections below the waterline, as well as the joy of watching marine life. Check it out at diveblue.com. That's DIVEBLU3.com. Thanks to Forbes Yachts for presenting this season of On the Wind. Our friends at Forbes can help you buy your dream boat or sell your current one. Forbes and his wife Jamie have also been guests on this very podcast. You can check out episode 332 to hear about them cruising the Bahamas in a lobster boat with their two kids. Forbes has given many of us at 59 North advice on buying our own boats, and he's a great resource for all things boat market related. You can go to ForbesYachts.com to browse their current and past yacht listings, which is always fun, and to find your dream boat. Thanks again, Forbes, for sponsoring the show.
You're listening to On the Wind. I'm your host, Emma Garshagen.
McKayla Bower is an experienced outdoorswoman who's preparing to set off around the world alone on her San Juan 30 Swirl. She has spent most of her life high in the mountains, summiting peaks, traversing ridgelines, and climbing huge rock faces. McKayla's drive is for the betterment of her community. Since coming out as transgender, she has learned that visibility is essential, and she hopes her journey will be an example for others of how to follow your dreams and live authentically. Okay, hi. I feel like this has been such a long time coming because I found out about you and your project and your sailboat, I think in the fall, and then started listening to other interviews you've done and reached out to you, and now it is May. And unfortunately, we're not doing this in person, but we are finally talking. So thank you so much, McKayla, for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. I was also very excited when you reached out. So.
I'm honored. And I was just telling you I have a million questions. But why don't we start? I want to be able to picture, I know you're not currently on your boat, but you live aboard your boat Swirl, and are preparing her for a solo circumnavigation. So can you just paint me the picture of what your boat is and where your boat is? Like where are you going home to tonight?
Yeah, I live in a bay in the San Juan Islands in northwestern Washington. Swirl is a 1977 San Juan 30. She was designed by Bruce Kirby, the same guy who designed the laser racing dinghies, to race in these waters. He designed 2 of the San Juan class, the 23 and the 30. The 30 was the IOR standard race boat that he designed. So it's designed to adhere to the International Offshore Racing regulation. And it kind of just looks like an old 70s race boat, because that's what she is. There are a lot of boats that look real similar. There were only about 300 San Juan 30s made, and so people oftentimes, even up here, because most of them are still up in the Pacific Northwest, even up here, people still regularly think it's anything from a CNC 32. Oftentimes people think that she's like a 26-foot boat, especially if they come inside, because she does feel like a 6-foot boat or 26-foot boat. But she's pretty roomy. As far as where I'm going home to tonight, I rebuilt the entire interior of the boat, and so it's my own cozy design. I prioritize things like having a bigger kitchen over being able to sleep 4 people, because I've yet to find a need for that. And yeah, have a little wood-burning stove in there, and it's cozy.
Cozy. Because you've spent winters on the boat and like really, really lived aboard for a few years?
Since January of 2020.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. And you learned to sail on this boat, right?
I did. I had very, very minimal sailing experience before owning this boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you describe like what it was like taking the boat out sailing for the first time? Like what was that day like?
I had only left the slip twice, to take her to the yard to be hauled out and then to take her back to the slip. When I took her out sailing for the first time, and one of my coworkers and I, who also had no sailing experience, were pretty down to just go for an adventure, and we set a pretty lofty goal of sailing from Seattle to Kingston, which is about 5 hours each way.
Just a little day sail.
Just a little day sail. Yeah. And I had never put sails up on the boat before. She had never been on a sailboat before. And we took off and we made it work. What
was the weather like? Do you remember?
We drifted. It was pretty flat calm. We had intentionally it was actually a day in February, which typically February in the Pacific Northwest is pretty breezy, but we had chosen a day where we had like full sun, and it was blowing, less than 10 knots, probably 5 to 7 knots all day. Which is fine, because Swirl is a very overpowered race boat, and so taking her out in anything more than that, especially for first sail, I think would have been a little daunting. She came with 350% head soles, and the main is on a 30-foot boat, I have a mast that's 34 feet off the deck, so even the main is pretty huge for that boat.
That's cool. And so what was your sailing experience beforehand? Like, who had you gone sailing with, or when had you figured out that sailing was something you could even do?
Yeah, my mom's older brother owned a Hunter, I think it's a Hunter 46. And he was a millionaire, brokered airplanes for most of his life, and so that was kind of my intro to sailing, was this like super fancy boat that had, even in the early 2000s, just all of the state of the art when it came to navigation and electronics and all of that. And being docked in marinas that I'm sure for a boat that size were hundreds of dollars a night down in Mexico. And we took it out sailing once. We went out and motored around places on it other times. But several summers in a row, I went down and spent at least a week in Mexico with him and my mom and his wife. And that was my intro to sailing. And it felt like this dream, but the most unachievable thing you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, how did it become a thing that seemed achievable, even to just like live aboard a boat or have a boat, or like how did that become something that's felt possible?
Well, I was 18 years old and I was paddling around in a canoe in Langley, Washington, and there was this boat for sale. And that was the first time that I ever looked at a boat where I was like, I think it was for sale for $1,200 or something like that. And I actually ended up calling the guy, and it was one of those like, I'll pretty much give it to you for free. Like I just need it gone off that mooring. And I ended up not taking it, and I think that was a really, really wise decision. I think that would have been a terrible choice for me. At 18 years old, I think I would have just ended up way in over my head. But every once in a while, these boats that seemed crazy affordable without, like, really anything super wrong with them would pop up. And so I looked at a few other boats, and then I met some people because I lived in Seattle, and it has a huge live-aboard community. And so I met some other people who were living on boats. Some of my friends, I was an avid rock climber and mountaineer up until I injured my rotator cuff on my left arm in 2018. And through that world, I met some people who lived on boats, both sail and power. Had dinner with them, with a couple of them, different times, just over a multitude of years. But it was like, okay, these are people who like are in my social economic class and own and live aboard boats and like make it work. And then after my ex and I split up and I was looking for somewhere to live, that was when someone approached me about Swirl. And he was a friend of mine, and he was moving from Swirl to a bigger boat because he's trying to live on this tiny boat with a 60-pound dog and another person. It just wasn't working. And wondered if I would be interested in Swirl, and he gave Swirl to me. She cost me nothing up front. I think she ended up costing me in the ballpark of $35,000 now, but up front there was little to nothing. Yeah. And I kind of viewed her as an inexpensive place to live when I first moved aboard, with the definite intention to sail her. I wasn't going to own a boat and not take it sailing. And that was kind of how I ended up.
Yeah, mostly a floating apartment.
Exactly.
And then like maybe a new hobby.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I had high goals that my rotator cuff would get better. We're sitting here 5 years later now, and it doesn't hurt every day anymore, but I still can't climb. And so sailing kind of went from this hobby to then the pandemic happened. And I was like, okay, well, I could go away for a couple weeks. And went away for a couple weeks and then realized things were going to get a lot worse before they got better. And I was like, well, I could go away for a couple months. And ended up away for a couple months. And I had a friend living on the boat with me because they also had nothing to do during the beginning of the pandemic, and they had never been to the San Juan Islands before, and so that was kind of how I ended up here. I was like, oh, well, you have to see them, and what a cool way to go for the first time to arrive by boat. And then I just haven't left, and sailing just became more and more a part of my life and a part of my everyday, and working on this boat and getting it to the point where it was a very, very competent boat was kind of the first step before deciding to circumnavigate with it.
Yeah. What did you, what about sailing, like, clicked for you? Like, what do you enjoy about it?
It feels like freedom and flying the same way I think climbing and high alpine mountaineering feels like freedom and flying to me. Just that, like, and by flying, I could have gone into paragliding. Like, I don't mean literally flying, but that just feeling of being free, and having nothing that holds you down. Almost like it's a synergy between me and nature in a similar way that climbing was. And that is just something that I have to have in my life.
Do you remember the first time you felt that?
Oh, that first day I took it out sailing.
Really? Oh, that's so cool.
Oh, it was it pretty immediately clicked where I was like, oh, this is something I need to do a lot more.
Yeah. And when do you remember the first time you felt that with anything, like with climbing or skiing or anything else you've done?
It would have been with climbing, and it would have been, real young. I started climbing rocks when I was 8 or 9. And when my dad would come visit, we would go to a little climbing gym. And something about that really clicked too. I don't know if it was when I was that young, but definitely in my early teens, as I started to deal with some anxiety stuff, it was you couldn't keep me out of trees. Like that, and that really became a hobby and a passion of tree climbing before I was then in the position where I had my own car and could afford the gear and got really engaged in outdoor rock climbing in my early 20s.
Yeah. What do you think the connection between anxiety and climbing was?
Literally climbing away from your problems.
Yeah.
Like
an escape.
Yeah, my anxiety has so much to do with being around people and being able to be in a place that is so difficult to reach that the likelihood of anyone else being there is so unlikely. One of the things that appeals to me about solo circumnavigation was one of the same things that appealed to me about especially lead climbing was there's a belay partner on the other end of your rope, but they're not even there. And also in that circumstance, that's someone who you're so close with and trust so much. Ledge wives are a real thing. you go through an intimate experience with someone who you choose to be up on a rock with.
Yeah.
Whether it's an afternoon or whether it's a multi-day trip. And I think that that's actually one thing that I do like about sailing is that I can do something this big by myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that's giving me multiple questions, but I first want to ask about I guess comment that I hear that people, or maybe some people, can cause anxiety or can lead you to want to do these adventures solo, but you have found climbing partners maybe, or friends and people in your life who do not cause that anxiety. Do you feel like you're not I want to live alone forever and never see another person?
Yes, there are people who I want to continue to see every day. I can count them on one hand, though. And this is not an original term, but I refer to them to persons who aren't people. There are people who you have to deal with, and then there are your persons who aren't people.
Where did you get that from? I haven't heard that before.
Oh.
Do you know?
It was off a mental health podcast.
Huh.
Yeah. It was, I know that I have heard it somewhere else before. I've heard it. I don't personally identify on the autistic spectrum because I haven't been diagnosed, but a lot of those coping mechanisms and whatnot I find very helpful, and so I've listened to a lot of podcasts, especially about autistic relationships, and I think it probably came from one of those.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are, and I've wondered about that too, just with setting out on a big solo adventure, and this is not your first big solo adventure. I was wondering if what your support system was, and do you want to talk about that at all? Who your support system is?
Yeah. Really, when it comes to close friends, I can count them on one hand. And those are people who I will continue to communicate with even in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. and I have, you know, abilities to text and whatnot offshore, and those are people who I will continue to lean on. I'm also very close with my mom, and she'll be a big part of my support system, both logistically. This is not the first big solo adventure she's been through with me either. Yeah. And it's part of the reason I continue to lean on her. She was my ground support person when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, both in 2015 and in 2017.
Did you hike it twice, or did you do it in chunks?
I did in 2015 I hiked it, and then the 2017 I did the first 1,000 miles over again. I had done the desert in one of the driest years on record in 2015, and then 2017 up until this year, 2023, 2017 was the wettest year on record, and so I wanted to get up there and see it, and just experience the difference. And then I also am, to my knowledge, to anyone's knowledge, the only person to have Nordic skied the High Sierras in modern times, and that was part of that trip as well.
That's so cool. Yeah, I when did you start setting these big goals for yourself? Did that start when you were a kid, or was there do you remember the first big goal you set?
Yeah, it started when I was a kid, but it was different. I always wanted to go and wander off through the woods, and so pretty young, maybe 12 years old-ish. Oh, no, it had to have been before that. Maybe 10 years old-ish. I was gifted a pair of walkie-talkies for that exact reason, so that I could go wander off through the woods, and my mom could still check in with where the heck I was and if I was still alive while I was out there. And that one of the things that we learned pretty quickly was the base model didn't have a long enough range.
I was gonna ask that. I don't remember those having like a great range.
I mean, at one point we owned a pair of $400 or $500 walkie-talkies that had like a 40-mile range, so
that I could keep upgrading because you kept going further
pretty
away.
Much, yeah. And then I got really into. I lived in this pretty remote part of northeastern California, and I got into. I didn't even really realize that it was what I was getting into, but I got really into land navigation. And I knew where I lived, and one of my best friends I knew lived about 2 miles away as the crow flies, and so this was before the days of smartphones, and I think I printed off a topo map from the internet, and took a compass and found my way to Alicia's house. It was that kind of just adventuring, just cross country, through a neck of the woods with rattlesnakes and poison oak, but many run-ins with one, but not the other. Luckily, it was the poison oak. And just taking off on these adventures and just setting these goals of like, a lot of it was, can I get from point A to point B? And I have only, maybe knock on some wood here, I've only been really lost in my life once. Well, maybe twice. But once my mom was with me and teaching me a lesson, I was like 7 or 8 years old. But as far as being alone on a solo mission, I have only been really lost in my life once and found my way out. But
yeah. What do you like about those kinds of journeys? Like, is it the feeling at the end, or is it the during? Like, what part of it makes you keep going back for it?
It's the feeling throughout. I am someone who is there for the journey, not the destination. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that more.
No, I like that, because I think this is like a personal aside, but I was talking to my friend Nikki the other day. She's a sailor and she also hosts this podcast sometimes. And I'm refitting my boat right now. And I was like, just realizing how I was so stressed about like trying to reach deadlines and reach goals that I just wasn't enjoying the process at all. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a thing that I'm excited about. Like I should just be, like I'm sanding and painting today, but I like sanding and painting. Like I should just enjoy the fact that I get to sand and paint my own boat and not be like, am I going to be able to launch the boat in a month? So I think that's for me, it's always a good reminder. And I'm sure you also have days where you're stressed about the destination, but, especially with this kind of big goal and that you're now setting for yourself. I would really love to hear about the moment that you knew you wanted to sail around the world alone.
The interesting part of that question to me is I don't feel like I ever decided that I wanted to sail around the world alone. Going with someone else never crossed my mind. I was pretty sure from when this idea first started in my head, they're just going with someone else was never an option. And I think part of that logistically was I knew that if some other trusted people helped me deem it safe, I wanted to take Swirl, and Swirl is not set up for a second person. Mm-hmm. But I think I have had some phenomenal climbing partners. Some people who I'm still really close with, some people who I've lost contact with, but like would still bend over backwards for in a heartbeat, but they were really hard for me to find. Mm-hmm. Finding someone who matches my flavor of crazy, as one of my friends so lovingly put it, it doesn't happen very often. I have really struggled with finding people who want to do the same kinds of adventures in the same ways that I have. And so this idea of doing it solo didn't start with sailing around the world. It has been my default in every circumstance where I don't need a second person. And again, I think that just started from finding someone who matches my flavor of crazy.
I like that.
One of the things I struggled with in the climbing world, I love a climbing partner who will push me, but I felt like either I couldn't keep up with people or I couldn't find people who could keep up with me. And finding that right person who meshes with you. And I've never tried to find that person with sailing. I had a friend who sailed around with me for a while, but even still, they didn't really crew on the boat. I still did most of the sailing. I have never looked for crew to try and mesh with someone who has my same acceptable risk tolerance when it comes to storms or same...
Totally.
And so, that never crossed my mind. The moment I knew I wanted to sail around the world was kind of when I figured out that not only had no trans person ever done it, but only 2 openly queer people have ever done it. And it was 2 husbands in I think they finished in 2018. And that just seems kind of crazy to me. I couldn't believe with all the round the world races that there are now and whatnot, and I kind of assumed that that's where it would crop up is someone who did a non-stop circumnavigation,
like a Vendée Globe or something.
Who is trans or queer in some way. And as soon as I found that just no one is out and open, because I'm sure that queer people have circumnavigated. I'm sure that trans people have circumnavigated, but it being an open and out person really felt like a moment that I could step up and do something for my community, while also feeding this desire for adventure. It kind of started because I wanted to sell the boat.
Yeah, I actually have a quote. I have a quote. I'm going to quote you to yourself.
Okay.
Because I saw, oh, now I'm talking too loud for my microphone because I got excited.
We got excited.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm talking way too loud because I'm so much more amped up. In another podcast, you were talking about how you were thinking of selling your boat and moving back to the mountains, but then you were realizing that you felt like you hadn't actually accomplished anything. And what you said was, I just wasted 3 years of my life learning how to sail, and then I never did anything with it. And I think the idea that it tells me a lot about you, that you like bought a boat not knowing how to sail, went and figured it out yourself. A lot of people are like, I have to hire someone. And I think there's benefits to hire as a professional sailor. I think there's benefits to hiring a professional to teach you things. But like, I'm also, so many people teach themselves to sail. And I think the way that you went and did that and lived on your boat and covered thousands of miles is such an accomplishment. A lot of people would be like, great, I did something bigger than I thought I would do. I can sell my boat and move to the mountains. And your view of it is, I didn't accomplish a single thing. So what's your reaction to that?
Just to laugh. I don't have many people quote me back to me. But that sounds like something I would say. I mean, I remember saying that, but
yeah.
I think that sums up my personality pretty well. I didn't get into rock climbing and go, okay, I've climbed this really hard grade, or I've climbed this one project that I want to do. I got into rock climbing and I went, okay, how do I get into technical aid big wall climbing, where I'm going to go live on the side of a mountain for a month and figure this really hard thing out, and then I will feel like I have accomplished something. Yeah. God, I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you where that came from in my life. I mean, I think that is a fairly common through line with how I approach a lot of things. As an aside that has nothing to do with sports, but just elsewhere that has applied in my life. I enjoy writing. I almost flunked out of English my entire school career. But I really enjoy writing. And I didn't stop at writing short stories. I wrote 100,000 word novel that maybe someday I'll try and get published. Oh my God. It's like, I don't have the ability to half-ass anything, as I believe my mother once told me. I
mean, that's both like, I'm impressed by that and a little jealous of it. As so, I'm like, I also like to write, and I'm like barely getting myself through one page of something I'm trying to, like I'm impressed by that. But I also wonder, like, do you expect a lot of yourself? Like, are you hard on yourself with things? Yeah.
I think that is probably my biggest character flaw, and thing that I struggle with, and I think it stems from anxiety that I've struggled with my whole life, feeling like others don't view me how I feel they should, or think that I'm doing enough. And I think that has led to a lot of this. I have gone through a lot of therapy in my life to try and separate those things, and I think I do a very good job at it now. But I think that that's where it started from. And yeah, I can still be very hard on myself, but I've also learned a ton of forgiveness for myself, especially over the last 5.5 years since I came out. And I think that was a big part of it, was wanting society to view me in a certain way and trying to be this over-accomplisher, and now I don't quite have that same need, since I think society now gets to view me as who I really am. And now I get to cherry pick the things that I want to go crazy and over-accomplish with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I just, like, I'm, like, feeling suddenly so emotional. That's, like, I'm so happy for you that you're, like,
you.
yeah, like, because I think, yeah, figuring out how to, like, be kind to ourselves is really hard, and how to, like, feel like whatever you're doing is enough is really tough, and yeah, to, like, clear some of those hurdles and be able to be who you are is huge. So I'm very happy for you. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think, I think, like, I've heard you say in relation to, like, doing this solo circumnavigation with this message of being someone who is out and trans and queer, you've talked about how coming out was the scariest thing you've ever done. And I want to talk more about fear, I think, with you, if you are down for that. I guess to start, like, what gave you the courage to come out?
I almost died in an avalanche, or I could have died in an avalanche. I guess I didn't almost, like, I walked away from it. I walked out of the mountains. I was by myself when it happened. But it was a moment where, you're lucky, a different interviewer has asked me a lot about this over the last 2 months, and I finally, it was like therapy. I finally parsed through a lot of how this kind of went down emotionally and mentally for me.
Thanks to them.
Yeah. I have done a lot of dangerous things in the mountains. When it comes to fear, and we can get into this a little bit more after I try to use this to answer this question and not get distracted. I think it's so important, and I think that where a ton of courage comes from is being able to parse the difference between real danger and perceived risk, and those two things. And I've talked a lot about it when it comes to climbing, but I think that it's super important in anything. In the circumstance that I was in 2017, going over Glen Pass in the High Sierras, right smack dab in the middle of Kings Canyon National Park, I was in a dangerous situation that I felt like I had control of all the parameters to the most extent that we can have control of anything in a circumstance like that. I had arrived at about 3 p.m, and the snow was way too soft and avalanche conditions were way too high for me to go over the pass that day. I set up camp. I got up at 2 a.m. I got all strapped into skis, and I start heading up over the pass, and I stop to do an avalanche check in on a part of the face of the mountain where you should stop because it's going to be the most stable, but still give you an idea of the snow conditions. And while I was cutting this avalanche check, I triggered an avalanche. I did everything right, and this still happened. Yeah. And that was terrifying to me. It's the only time in my life, at least with that high of consequences, where I have done everything right and it still went wrong. Like, I followed the manual, both literally, as well as, like, from my own practical experience. I followed the manual on what I was supposed to be doing in that circumstance, and it still went wrong. And that was so scary. And I came back from that trip, and I had always known that I was trans, and I had spent all the time, as so many of my trans siblings do, just sitting in the shadows on Reddit forums and Facebook groups, and just hadn't ever had that conversation with anyone except my high school girlfriend. She was the only person I had ever had that conversation with. And she's still one of my best friends, and was amazingly supportive then and still is to this day. And I just knew that something had to change. And so I started seeing a therapist, and I kind of got the courage to come out, but it all stemmed from that, like, this went wrong. This could have been it. I think that it almost gave me the courage to tackle something, something that was even scarier than anything I had ever done up to that point. And I think that same, it's almost like writing a pros and cons list in your head, except at a factor of 10. That same distinguishing between perceived risk, there was so much perceived risk around coming out, and actual danger, which there was some. There's some in climbing. There's some in sailing. All these different things have actual danger, but that perceived risk was just so high with coming out that I just couldn't ever get to a point where I could do it. And then I finally arrived at a point, I think that it's important to talk about the really high suicide rate with trans people. I myself there was never a point where I was like, I have to transition or this is just all over. That said, and this fed into the decision to circumnavigate, me turning 30 was a really emotional moment because I never thought I was going to be 30. I never had any specific reason why I wasn't going to, but between all of the crazy, in quotes, crazy, I think it was all fairly controlled, but to most people, crazy stuff that I did in the mountains, being so unhappy with how society viewed me and a sense of gender, I never thought I was going to live to be 30. And then all of a sudden it happened. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. It was a really emotional week. And now I just turned 31 a month ago. And that was a big part of it, where I was like, okay, I like lived to this milestone that I never thought I was going to live to. And by no means am I sailing off into the ocean thinking, okay, now I can go do this dangerous thing I won't survive. That's not it. It was like, I had to figure out what that next adventure was going to be. I wanted to do something with my boat, and it just kind of all lined up, to make this project happen.
Yeah. That's, I'm so excited for you. I think talking about fear for a little longer, I really like how you separated out danger, real danger, and perceived risk. And I think that's incredibly relevant with sailing, as you know, and especially long ocean passages, and the moments where like you follow the manual and things still go wrong. I guess this is a big question, but I'm wondering how you handle fear when you're in the wilderness.
It's stopping and centering myself, and oftentimes for me specifically, that looks like 5 deep breaths, or 5 things I can see. 5 things I can see, 4 things I can feel, 3 things I can smell, 2 things I can hear, and 1 thing I can taste. That breakdown works well for me.
Can you? Sorry, I want to visualize this hat. Like, can you describe like a situation you were in where you did this? Like, it can be small or big, and it doesn't have to be sailing. But like, is there like a moment you remember of doing that?
I one of the last big scary climbing moments I had where I think that there was high real danger, but there was really high perceived risk. I was on Green Giant Buttress outside of Darrington in northern central Washington, and I had climbed off the route, and I ended up on this slab that was very quickly turning vertical, that was then going to turn maybe even past vertical if I continued climbing into it. I wasn't paying enough attention, and slab climbing on these tiny, I mean, you're holding on to like barely more than your fingernails worth of ledges. Pretty difficult climbing, right at the edge of the grades that I can climb. And I was leading, and my last piece of protection was 50 feet below me, and I looked up and kind of realized where I was and realized how bad a fall would be right there. We were multiple pitches up, so I wasn't going to hit the ground, but I was probably going to break something if I had slipped right then, and there was nowhere to put any more protection. I was off the line of bolts I was supposed to be following, and I had a bunch of trad gear with me as well, which goes in natural cracks and defects in the rock, and you can fall on those and they will catch you. And there was nowhere to put any of it. And I started to panic a little bit. The perceived risk was super high. Like, I was going to break something if I fell, and I was going to, and there wasn't a way to back out of this. Like, it was far too difficult to be able to down climb. And you start to get the shakes in the legs, which makes it even worse. And I took 5 deep breaths, and it didn't quite cut it. So I was like, okay, what are 5 things I can see? I can see my hands on the fingers, and I can see my fingers on the rock in front of me. I can see this scary place on the rock that I don't want to climb into. Let's not think about that. I can see these trees up above me. I can look down and see my rope leading back to my climbing partner, Toast, and I can look out and I can see this like beautiful blue sky. And it's just kind of like, as you go through that, I went from this like really panic, like, let's not look at this rock that I might fall and die on, but like, let's look at the beauty of where we are for a second, and then kind of go through like, okay, what are 4 things that I can feel? I can feel my legs shaking. We need to stop that, but I can feel these pretty solid holds under my fingers. Like, and that's where that was kind of the moment where I started differentiating the perceived risk of, I'm in a really scary situation and I can't fall right now, but the actual danger isn't that high. I'm standing on these holds. I'm not slipping. I have all 4 points on 4 difficult but decent holds, and I can take a second to ground myself and to differentiate between the perceived risk and the actual danger, and realize that I'm not actually in as scary of a situation that my brain immediately thinks that I am, and I can start to handle that fearsome. As you start to handle that fearsome, for me, my very analytical engineering brain kicks in and goes, okay, how do we engineer our way out of this? And in that particular instance, I happen to have a sky hook hanging on my harness. It's this little, not a grappling hook, but like, imagine something Batman might have. They are designed for aid climbing. They are not designed to rappel off of. However, it was the best answer I had in this circumstance, and still, even if it had blown, the worst thing that was going to happen, I was going to take this big fall, could have broken something, but I wasn't going to die. And so really, I wasn't putting myself in any more danger by using this. And it was just, I communicated with Toast about what was going on, and that I had gotten off the route, and that I needed to back down off this, and I couldn't down climb. And so I was going to try to have her lower me on this sky hook. And we just had to be really ginger and soft and careful with it. And it worked. I got it.
What did you attach it to? Like, where did it go?
Oh, like a fingernail's worth of rock. Like, it has a little, so it's like it's if you make a, like, our pirate hook with your finger, that's the shape of of a sky hook. And it essentially sits on a ledge, and then the bottom of it just applies pressure into the ledge. And by ledge, I mean something that's, maybe a millimeter thick. And you just hook it on there, and not designed for the purpose I used it for, but it worked. And I was able to take that moment to differentiate that, and even once I was on that piece and rappelling down, I was able to take that moment to go, okay, I haven't actually put myself in any more actual danger, even though this perceived risk, and I think it's the perceived risk that makes us fearful. Actual danger you can deal with. There's a way to engineer or think or get yourself out of actual danger, but perceived risk feels insurmountable.
Yeah, I think that's I like that view of it a lot, and I think you're giving me language for, or I don't know, I think this is like that's like great language and like tangible tools for dealing with things that like we deal with all the time. Even just in our, human land lives where we're dealing with people like you were talking about. There's a lot of that. And then also, at sea, absolutely. Or I haven't been in climbing situations like that, but like climbing outside and trad climbing, always following. I have had so many moments where I'm like, this feels scary. And then stopping and figuring out what I'm actually scared of. And if the thing that I'm imagining going wrong happens, what I would actually do in that situation, and like slowing it all down is such an important skill.
In sailing, I think one of my biggest moments of perceived risk, just real quick story, was breaking a jib sheet in like 20 knots of wind. And wind over tide waves. That feels really scary. Like all of a sudden you don't have as good steerage of your boat and there's this huge sail flapping around the wind and it feels scary.
Yeah, so noisy.
But the actual danger really isn't very high. Like, if anything, you've just depowered your boat and you're going to have a moment to deal with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a good example. And I think like it's easy to, if you don't have that mindset or the experience of handling situations like that, and I think you're blessed with an engineering mind that I often wish I had, because I also think just being able to be like, okay, here, let's break it into the smaller pieces and deal with the problem. I think sets you up very well for handling these kinds of things that you've already handled. What impresses me so much about people like you who charge into something and say, hey, everyone, I'm doing this. I find it incredibly brave and also very scary from my own, like, I would feel so scared perspective. So thinking about fear and the sort of high standard it seems like you set for yourself, I'm curious how you're defining success for this project.
I would really like to make it around the globe. I also don't think that is the end-all, be-all goal. That is absolutely what I am setting out saying that I'm going to do. My goal is to circumnavigate. If I don't circumnavigate, I will have fallen short of, at bare minimum, that stated goal. I don't think that has to be an absolute failure, though. I think that there is still success within that if I am able to still be the first trans person who goes out and crosses the Pacific, or who goes out and does the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. But I think, and I've talked a lot about this other places as well, and it continues to be one of the big themes, is my goal is to be able to help people who are scared to come out the same way that I was, to find community and examples of people who are doing the things that they want to do, that they are fearful will be taken away from them by coming out if they do. And so for me, it was an ice climber, Nikki Smith, who was my pinnacle example when I was coming out in the climbing world. And if I can be that for one person, this is a success for me.
Yeah.
That's the goal with this whole project.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of why I continue to do interviews like this, and that's the part of why I love talking to people like you who are able to help share this story broader. If my only goal was to go out and be the first queer person to circumnavigate the globe, I would just go do it. I wouldn't talk about it and make a big deal of it. It's about showing up for my community, especially those who are still closeted in my community.
Yeah. I think you know how important and admirable that is, but I'm really impressed by it. And I think it's both brave but it also just seems like to you it's something that you know you want to and have to do. So yeah. You just said something about for people who are coming out, there might be a fear that the things that they want to do in their lives might be taken away from them if they do come out. Can you talk about that a little more? Can you describe that?
Again, for me, I'll reference back to the mountaineering world because that's what I was so ingrained in when I came out. It is so in favor of cisgendered, heterosexual, white men.
Yep.
85% of the industry is that way. And that's actually a huge improvement over where it was in 2017. Mm-hmm. And I was worried that because of that, sponsorship opportunities, opportunities with climbing partners, were going to be taken away from me. And I mean, I guess this is worth saying. Some of them were, and that's okay. It was still worth it.
Yeah.
My flagship sponsor when I came out dropped me as a team athlete. Yeah. I won't mention who they are, but they're based in South Korea, and that's pretty much why. It's illegal to be trans in South Korea, and they went, we can't have a trans athlete on our team. But that sucked. But the good that has come from it, is just so enormously outweighs, anything like that. And the reality is, me coming out, that is the worst thing that happened. I have had an incredible family and a great group of friends, and my climbing partner stuck with me through all of it. Toast and I climbed together for 6 or 7 years. I moved to Guatemala in the middle of it, and we didn't for a year and a half, and then I came back and we kept climbing together, and I came out and we kept climbing together, and I think that I wasn't ever worried about losing her specifically, but I was worried about... I also knew that she and I wouldn't climb together forever, and I think I was worried about the struggles of finding someone else to climb with next who felt comfortable with me, who whatever that looks like, and
and there must have just been so many unknowns too,
there were so many unknowns, and I had no one, and I had no one to talk to about it. I had no one who had gone through it, and I think that's part of why Nikki became so important in my life, is because she was someone. She and I have since communicated directly, but at the time, I wasn't even talking to her. It was just oh, well, it worked for her.
Something to
I guess I can do this.
Yeah, which is, that is such a crucial thing, and I think you see that in representation. Definitely in the outdoor world and in the sailing world, and even for me, and I have fewer hurdles to jump as a cis woman, but just getting into the sailing world and looking around and being okay, why do I think I can just maybe own a boat, maybe sail across an ocean, maybe work on sailboats, maybe be a captain, and starting to see people who I related to in various ways, and also working on boats where there were young women, queer women, people who I was oh, community, it's so valuable. It's so And I think it's something that if you understand it, explaining it sometimes feels silly, because to me or to you, it feels like, of course, seeing someone who resembles you or resembles your community is so valuable, but some people don't have to think about it at all. So yeah, sometimes it's valuable to describe. So thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah.
So I think how many days are you from your, you're just, she's showing me she's showing me her phone.
That has the weather forecast and my countdown.
Oh my gosh.
Well, and the thing that I keep saying too is 88 days is July 29th. That is my last commitment, and then I am taking the first weather window after that.
Yeah. And then you start. And then, like, even if you stop around the corner and wait for another weather window or whatever, or fix something, like, but then you're going, and that's so exciting. I guess without like going through a checklist, I'm curious what's left on your list, whether that's boat related or personal, or like, yeah, what's left on your list?
There are a few boat logistic things. And this might surprise some of your listeners, I don't have an inboard in Swirl. And IOR boats have very skinny sterns. They are technically canoe stern boats that have just been, the canoe stern has been chopped off. And so right now the outboard mount is on the stern of the boat, but I have a refurbished Navic wind vane. Currently, everyone asks, all the sailors in my life are like, where is your wind vane? I'm like, it's on the boat. It's in pieces. It's on the boat. And so I have a refurbished 2009 Navic wind vane that needs to get installed on the stern of the boat, and there's not room for both. And it turns out not many people put outboards on the side of specifically IOR boats. I've seen them on the side of other boats.
Yeah.
And I did end up finding one. The guy who designed, I can't remember if it was the Aries wind vane or the Cape Horn wind vane, but that guy,
Cape Horn guy.
Yeah,
Yes,
so he designed one that's really nice and, in my opinion, a little over-engineered. And so I have designed my own simpler version of that. And cool. I designed it, and I found a stainless worker who was willing to do the custom fabrication for me, and it was supposed to be delivered by the end of April. And in the middle of April at 11 p.m., he sent me a Facebook message and said, I don't have time to get to your project. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Oh, no. Project.
I have scrambled, and parts are in the mail, and I have it down to the point where I'm going to do all of my own drilling, all of my own bending. I'm going to reuse part of the old mount that I wasn't planning on reusing, but there's no reason not to. And I'm going to be able to take it to a stainless worker and go, I need 4 welds done. I need 4 welds. That's it. Can you please do 4 welds for me sometime in the next 2 months?
Another reason to do things alone.
Yeah, right?
Okay, my last question is with this. You can think of this as like all the things you've ever done, or maybe more specifically, getting ready to go on this circumnavigation. But I'm wondering what you're most proud of.
I mean, the first answer that popped into my head was coming out and transitioning, and I think that that's the answer. And I think that, as cliche as it may be, I think about little 5-year-old McKayla, and what would she be proud of me having accomplished at this point in my life, and that's the biggest thing. I've been in these kind of regular conversations with a person right now who doesn't really understand why I felt the need to socially transition, and like why that is so important to trans people. And it all stems from that. We unfortunately live in such a gendered world and such a gendered society that just being seen as a boy and a man through so much of my life it just never fit. Everything was through that lens. Like that's the starting point. You come out of the womb and people are like, oh, it's and your gender is like the first thing that ever gets applied to you, and all of everything that goes with it in that moment, and breaking that is so hard. And I just like, yeah, that's what I'm most proud of. That's what I think little 5-year-old McKayla would be most proud of. I think it's my biggest accomplishment. I'm pretty proud of some of my accomplishments. I mean, from climbs I've done to skiing the high Sierras to my fastest known time I hold on the Silver Peak route and the high Cascades, like all of that. Like, there's a list of things that I feel like I have accomplished this, but as far as what the biggest thing is, or the thing that I'm most proud of, it all stems from that. It all stems from being the right person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great answer. And, I want to end here and thank you for your time and for being so open. And I think there are so many. I'm excited to keep up with you, and as you set sail, and even through the summer of like getting the last bits together. It always feels insane, and then it happens, and the best moment is when you finally left and you're like, okay, whatever I didn't bring, and also like you can always get it if you need it at the next stop. But like there's I'm excited for that moment for you, and hopefully to keep talking to you as you go, and follow your journey. And I'll make sure people get directed to your website and all the places that they can also keep up with you. Is there anything you want to like shout out for people to go to other than your website, or ways people can support you?
My website and my Instagram are by far the places I'm most active. It's just at svswirl on Instagram, and then whoismckaylabower.com. The biggest printed press release around my circumnavigation will be coming out in July, and that'll be an interview and feature with Outside Magazine. Encourage people to check that out as well. And if you want to get involved and support the project, there are links all over my website. If you want to support in a recurring way, there's a patreon.com/svswirl. If you want to make a one-time donation, there's a PayPal link on my website in like 7 different places. If you can't find it, I'll try harder.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, I'm so grateful for this. And yeah, congratulations on all of this. And I'm excited to keep following. Thanks again to Dive Blue for presenting this season of On the Wind with their tankless scuba dive systems. You go to diveblue.com, that's DIVEBLU3.com to learn more. And thanks also to our friends at Forbes Yachts for presenting this season of the show as well. They can help you buy your dream boat or sell your current boat. That's at ForbesYachts.com. On the Wind is the podcast about sailing, created by 59 Degrees North and hosted by me, Emma Garshagen, August Sandberg, Nikki Henderson, and Andy Schell. The show is mixed and produced by Lee Cumberland. Episode artwork and website show notes are created by Laura Parent. The intro theme music was written and performed by former podcast guest Cameron Dale, and the outro music you're hearing now is by our friends at Stormweather Shanty Choir. We love hearing from you, so send us a note at holdfast@59-north.com. You can also help us out a lot by reviewing the show on iTunes. Thanks, and hold fast.
I spent it fast, got drunk as drunk could be. And when me money was all gone on liquor and the horse, I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. As I was walking down the street, I met sweet Angeline. She said, come home with me, me lad, and we'll have a cracking time. But when I awoke, it was no joke. I found I was all alone. My silver watch and my money too, and my whole bloody gear was gone. Was gone, was gone. My whole bloody gear was gone. It was when I awoke, it was no joke, for my whole bloody gear was gone. As I was walking down the street, I met Big Rapper Brown. I asked him if he would take me in, and he looked at me with a frown. He said,
last time you was paid up with me, you took up no score. But I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more.
once more, once more, to go to sea once more. I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Sometimes we're catching whales, me lads, but mostly we get none. With a 20-foot oar in every paw from 5 o'clock in the morn. And when daylight's gone and the night's coming on, we rest upon our oars. And oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Ashore, ashore, or snug with the girls ashore. Oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Come all you seafaring lads that listen to me song. When you go a big boating, boys, make sure you do not go wrong. You take my tip when you come off a trip, don't go with any whores. But get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more.